Good day everyone, and welcome to our first coding lesson in computer programming using C#. Today marks an exciting step because we will begin writing our very first program. C# is a modern programming language developed by Microsoft and is widely used to create desktop applications, websites, mobile apps, cloud services, and even games using the Unity game engine. One reason many schools teach C# is because its syntax is organized, readable, and beginner-friendly. Throughout this course, we will not only learn how to write code, but also understand why each line of code is important. Remember, becoming a good programmer is not about memorizing commands, but about understanding how programs work and solving problems logically. By the end of today's lesson, you will have written your very first C# program and understand how it works. Now that we know what C# is, let's understand what a C# program actually does. A C# program is simply a collection of instructions written by a programmer to perform a specific task. These instructions tell the computer exactly what actions to perform and in what order. Every program follows a simple process known as input process and output, or IPO. First, the program may receive information from the user as input. Next, it processes that information according to the instructions written by the programmer. Finally, it produces an output, such as displaying a message or calculating a result. Even the largest applications, such as Facebook or online banking systems, are built from many small instructions working together. Understanding this concept will help you see programming as organizing logical steps, rather than writing complicated code. This is the basic structure of a C# program. At first glance, it may look confusing, but each line has a specific purpose. And by the end of today's lesson, you will understand what every part does. The first line, using system, allows the program to use built-in features from the .NET library. The class program serves as a container that holds our code. Inside the class is the main method, which is the starting point of every C# application. Whenever you run a C# program, the computer begins executing instructions inside the main method. Finally, console.writeLine displays text on the screen. Don't worry if these terms seem unfamiliar right now. We will study each part one at a time and practice using them until they become easy to understand. Let's begin with the first line of our program, using system. This statement tells the compiler that our program wants to use the features found in the system namespace. You can think of a namespace as a toolbox containing many useful tools that programmers can use instead of creating everything from scratch. One of those tools is the console class, which allows us to display text on the screen. Without importing the system namespace, we would have to write much longer code to access these features. Most C# programs include using system, because it provides many of the functions needed for basic programming. As you continue learning, you'll discover additional namespaces that help with files, networking, graphics, and many other tasks. After importing the system namespace, the next part of our program is the class. In C#, every program is organized into classes. You can think of a class as a container or folder that stores related code together. In our example, the container is named program. Inside this class is the main method, which is one of the most important parts of every C# application. The main method is known as the entry point because it is where the computer starts executing the program. When you press the run button in Visual Studio, the operating system looks for the main method and begins reading the instructions inside it from top to bottom. As we continue writing programs, almost all of our code will be placed inside this method until we learn about creating additional methods later in the course. Now it's time to write our first real instruction. The console.writeLine method is used to display text on the screen. Everything placed inside the quotation marks is printed exactly as it appears, making it one of the easiest and most useful commands for beginners. Notice that every statement ends with a semicolon. In C#, the semicolon tells the compiler that one instruction has ended and the next one can begin. If you forget it, the program may produce an error during compilation. You can use multiple console.writeLine statements to display several lines of text, with each statement appearing on a new line in the console window. This command is commonly used to display greetings, instructions, results, and messages to the user. As we progress through the course, you'll use this method frequently to display information and test your programs. We are now ready to write our very first complete C# program. Although it contains only one line of output, This simple example introduces the basic structure that you will use in almost every program you create. When you run the application, the computer first reads the main method, because it is the starting point of the program. It then executes the console.writeLine statement and displays the message, "Hello World," on the screen. This example may seem simple, but it represents an important milestone, because it confirms that your development environment is working correctly, and that you understand how a basic C# application is organized. Every large software application begins with small programs like this. So mastering the fundamentals is the first step toward building more advanced applications. One of the easiest ways to understand programming is by experimenting with your code. In this example, we added 3 console.writeLine statements instead of just one. Notice that the computer displays the messages in exactly the same order they appear in the program. It does not rearrange them or skip any instructions. This demonstrates an important principle in programming. Computers execute instructions sequentially, unless you specifically tell them to do otherwise. You can change the words inside the quotation marks to display your own name, a greeting, or any message you like. This simple exercise helps you become familiar with editing code and observing how small changes affect the program's output. As you continue practicing, you'll become more confident in writing and modifying programs on your own. Making mistakes is a normal part of learning programming, and every programmer, even professionals, encounters errors every day. Some of the most common beginner mistakes include forgetting a semicolon at the end of a statement, missing quotation marks around text, or using incorrect capitalization. Remember that C# is a case-sensitive language, which means WriteLine and WriteLine are not the same. Another common mistake is forgetting to open or close braces properly, which can prevent the program from compiling. Instead of becoming frustrated by errors, treat them as learning opportunities. Read the error messages carefully, because they often tell you where the problem is located. Debugging or finding and fixing mistakes is an essential skill that every successful programmer develops through practice and patience. Congratulations on completing your first coding lesson in C#. Today, you learned that every C# application follows a basic structure, and that the main method is where program execution begins. You also discovered how using system provides access to built-in features and how console.writeLine allows your program to display messages on the screen. Most importantly, you successfully understood and modified your first C# program. Remember that programming is a skill developed through consistent practice, curiosity, and patience. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because every error is an opportunity to learn something new. Continue experimenting with your code, change the messages you display, and observe the results. In our next lesson, we will move beyond displaying text and learn how to use variables and data types to store and manipulate information, making our programs more interactive and useful.